on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog, and yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
A very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up over the next hour. Well, last night the final two contestants to be the next Conservative leader and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss went head-to-head in the debate, prompting and promoting their economic visions of what they would impose if they were to become Prime Minister. It was, though, an hour of trading blows, and snap polling suggests that the candidates just about level in the TV debate, with Rishi Sunak preferred by Labour voters and Liz Truss popular among the Tories, which in this race might be slightly more important. We'll be speaking to journalists and MPs with the latest political reaction and looking ahead to tonight's debates. Meanwhile, Lord David Trimble, the former First Minister of Northern Ireland, has passed away, described as a key architect of the Good Friday Agreement, will be speaking to people in Northern Ireland for the very latest reaction on his death. And government figures have revealed that as many as 5,000 fish and chip shops could close due to soaring costs because of tariffs and ingredients. Pretty devastating stuff if you like your fish and chips. We'll be speaking to the industry to find out what's happening and how potentially it could be stopped. And as always, want to hear what you've got to say. Do get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk, particularly if you like fish and chips, or tweet me at GBNews. All that and so much more between now and 4. But first, at the top of the hour, bang on the hour, it's the very latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 3 o'clock. I'm Rosie, keeping you up to date on GB News. The two candidates to become the UK's next Prime Minister will face off again tonight, following a heated first head-to-head debate. The pair traded blows over tax, with the Foreign Secretary saying Rishi Sunak would lead the country into a recession. But the former Chancellor claimed there was nothing Conservative about Liz Truss's approach.
Under my plans, we would start paying down the debt in 3 years' time. So I'm not putting it on the never. I would start paying it down in 3 years.
Liz, that's simply not right. You promised almost £40 billion of unfunded tax cuts, £40 billion more borrowing. That is the country's credit card. It's our children and grandchildren, everyone here, kids, who are going to have to pick up the tab for that.
Labour's Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, was watching the debate. He says neither candidate showed the kind of leadership the country needs.
I think the debate we saw last night confirms that these are two political lightweights who supported, defended and enabled Boris Johnson to be the Prime Minister for the last 3.5 or so years. What we need is whoever wins to call a general election to give the British public the choice of a fresh start.
Archie Battersby's parents are vowing to continue their son's life support despite a legal ruling that treatment can stop. Appeal court judges say doctors at the Royal London Hospital can lawfully stop providing life-saving care. That could happen in less than 24 hours. Well, Archie, the 12-year-old, hasn't regained consciousness since suffering an accident at home in April. Yesterday, his father was rushed to hospital with a suspected stroke or heart attack. His family say he'll be released later today. Archie's mother, Holly, told GB News this morning they're going to appeal.
I believe we've still got one more option, which obviously we've come this far. I'm not going to stop now.
What is that option?
There's a possibility, United Nations or the European Court, I believe. So we're deciding today. Obviously, it's not something any parent wants to face. Again, I'm just going to give it all I can until I can't go no more.
The government doesn't know whether the coronavirus traffic light travel system that was enforced on those arriving into the UK actually worked. That's the conclusion of the Public Accounts Committee, who say nearly £500 million was spent on the quarantine scheme that caused huge confusion with 10 rule changes within a year. Arrivals from red list countries had to stay in a quarantine hotel for at least 10 days. Only 2% of those guests tested positive. MPs have accused the energy regulator Ofgem of being negligent. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy says the government needs to change its out-of-date energy bill support for households. The Select Committee added that a huge insulation drive needs to be launched urgently, as it would permanently bring down bills. Energy expert Will Hudson told us there are things we can do to try to cut energy costs.
Britain has got the oldest housing stock in Europe, right? And we can take pride, I think, in having built houses that were made to last. But those houses are drafty. They leak energy. And if you can plug those leaks, you're going to save up to £600 from your bill. So the message of yesteryear was switch energy supplier to get the best price. I think the message going forward is look for energy efficiency so as to reduce your energy usage.
Increased drinking fueled by the pandemic could lead to thousands of extra deaths over the next 20 years. A study by the University of Sheffield found that people who were drinking at risky levels before the pandemic increased their alcohol consumption when COVID hit. NHS doctor Frankie Jackson-Spence told us one of the key concerns is that consumption still remains high.
We've seen an increase in the number of alcohol-related diseases, hospital admissions and deaths from alcohol. In the first year after the pandemic, so in 2020, there was a 20% increase in alcohol-related deaths, and we haven't seen that statistic come down. So I think alcohol is another thing that's going to have long-term implications for people's health and the NHS.
Network Rail's advising people not to travel by train tomorrow unless absolutely necessary due to another day of planned strikes. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators are planning to walk out in a continuing dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Network Rail says only 20% of services will run. Some places will have no trains at all. To minimise disruption, they've published a special timetable showing many trains will start later and finish earlier. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the briefing with Darren.
Thank you very much indeed, Rosie. It is 6 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. We're on TV, online, and of course on your wireless radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Well, the Conservative leadership race candidates traded blows in a TV debate last night that saw Rishi Sunak attempt to close the gap on the frontrunner Liz Truss. The two candidates clashed on tax cuts, the cost of living crisis, defence, climate, and somewhat on Brexit too, and in increasingly fiery exchanges. Let's have a quick look back at some of the highlights.
Under my plans, we would start paying down the debt in 3 years' time. So I'm not putting it on the never, never. I would start paying it down in 3 years.
That's simply not right. You promised almost £40 billion of unfunded tax cuts, £40 billion more borrowing. That is the country's credit card. It's our children and grandchildren, everyone here's kids, who are going to have to pick up the tab for that.
Rishi, that is not true.
There's nothing conservative about doing that.
Under my plans, we would start paying down the debt in 3 years' time. I don't believe this negative, declinist language.
It's your own
that we're
economic
hearing.
Advisor, Liz. It's not mine. It's your own advisor.
I have lots of economists that are backing my plans. Everybody thinks that putting up taxes at this moment is going to hurt the economy.
Do you know what mortgage rates are in the US at the moment? Do you want to use them as an example? Their mortgage rates are almost 50% higher than mortgage rates in this country because they're borrowing so much.
I'm sorry, this is scaremongering.
Canada actually has
Project Fear.
Liz, I remember the referendum campaign. And there were only one of us who was on the side of Remain and Project Fear, and it was you, not me.
Okay.
And you talk
maybe
about
I've learnt from that.
What we do need to do is acknowledge that China is a threat to our national security. It's a threat to our economic security. And that's why, as Chancellor, I was pleased that we could put forward something called the National Security and Investment Bill. We also need to stand up for our values. And, for example, when it came to Hong Kong, I was pleased to ensure that we put the funding in place to welcome to this country thousands of people who wanted to leave.
Rishi, I challenged you on this in the debate last week. As recently as a month ago, you were pushing for closer trade relationships with China. This is not something you've advocated in government. I'm delighted that you've come round to my way of thinking.
Well, Well, there you go. That was the debate. Apparently, Rishi Sunak interrupted Liz Truss 22 times in the first 12 minutes of that debate. What do you make of that? Do get in touch, by the way. GBViews at gbnews.uk. There was a YouGov poll carried out of Conservative members, the ones that actually really matter, of course, in this leadership contest. And they suggested that 50% of people, 50% of those, I think it was 507 Tory party members, thought that Liz Truss had won. 39% thought Rishi Sunak had. And when it comes to likeability, Liz Truss was on 54%, Rishi Sunak on 35%. And on who was more trustworthy, Liz Truss 51%, Rishi Sunak 37%. So I think it's fair to say that in the mind, at least it seems, of those Conservative members, that Liz Truss won that debate last night. But we've got another one tonight, in just a couple of hours' time. Tom Howard, our political correspondent, is with me in the studio. Tom, afternoon to you. First of all, let's briefly look back at last night. Rishi really needed to make a big impact, didn't he? Because, I mean, unless the polls are way off, he is behind in this. And that didn't happen, did it?
It didn't. And I know that a lot of people have an instinctive mistrust of these polls. But actually, if we look back specifically at leadership elections, the polls have been really quite accurate in the past. Back in 2019, Boris Johnson was consistently ahead in those polls and he won. Theresa May didn't have much chance to prove that she was ahead, but she won amongst MPs. But most peculiarly, actually, probably 2015, when Jeremy Corbyn was leading in all of the polls, to the much to the surprise of the commentariat, and everyone was sort of thinking, these polls must be off, Jeremy Corbyn will never win. And then, of course, he goes and wins the Labour leadership. Interestingly, speaking to pollsters about polling political parties, it sounds like it's a difficult thing to do. But actually, political party members are probably overrepresented in most polls of normal people, because the kind of people that might want to respond to polls are more likely to be politically engaged. Exactly. So these are probably quite accurate, which takes us on to last night and probably explains a lot of the behaviour of Rishi Sunak. He was really keen to get in on every point, didn't let Liz Truss finish a lot of sentences, really trying to put his points across and in many ways cutting across Liz Truss. That's the behaviour of someone who feels like they really need to make a breakthrough, perhaps need to put off their opponents. Something needs to shift in this debate. And now, there have been a couple of polls out now, both of Opinium and of YouGov, but crucially, both of those polls, while they might be more mixed amongst the general public, amongst Conservative voters and Conservative members, it looks like Rishi didn't do enough.
So what happens next, though? Because we've got another debate this evening hosted by The Sun. We've got the first actual Conservative Party hustings on Thursday. I mean, these arguments, we know where they stand on tax and the economy. I mean, it will be interesting to see actually whether this debate tonight moves on to talk about other issues that actually haven't cropped up on the ITV Channel 4 or BBC debate, whether that is on housing, whether it's on migration, whether it is on a whole swathe of other stuff that's affecting the economy. I mean, or are we just going to get slightly more intense debates all the time on the same issues?
Yes, I think people were surprised a little bit last night that migration didn't come up. It was one of those issues that was polled by Opinium in the snap poll after, because they expected it to come out, but it didn't come up in that debate. So because the questions are being chosen by Sun newspaper readers tonight, perhaps that might be one that comes up. But yes, I do think that we are going to start to see this become a bit of a Groundhog Day contest. Because
I think we might already be there.
Because there's not only this further Sun debate, there's also a planned Sky News debate, no doubt more debates, and of course those 12 regional hustings hosted by the Conservative Party as well. This is going to become a contest of very rehearsed arguments, hearing the same lines again and again and again. And for a lot of people, they might switch off after a couple of weeks because it's going to sound incredibly samey. Unless there's some big Deus Ex Machina situation, we're not going to see a big shift. So really, in the next week, probably 2 weeks, it's the time that Rishi Sunak has to turn things around if we believe these polls. He's got to make a big moment, and that hasn't been forthcoming so far.
And just finally, Tom, I mean, let's look even beyond that to September. Let's work on the assumption that Liz Truss wins. I mean, it will be after what is turning into quite a divisive campaign. Last night, they both suggested they would work with each other. Do you really think that's possible, given the fundamental disagreement on the biggest issue this country is facing, i.e. what the hell to do about the economy?
Well, let's look back to 2019. Boris Johnson actually offered Jeremy Hunt a position in his cabinet. Jeremy Hunt, who was then, of course, Foreign Secretary, was offered the demotion of Defence Secretary, still a relatively important job. Jeremy Hunt turned that down because he didn't want to leave a great office of state. Now, it's almost unimaginable that Liz Truss would offer Rishi Sunak the post of Chancellor in her administration. They are so fundamentally, diametrically opposed in terms of what is the right thing to do with tax and spend at this particular moment in time. There is no way Rishi Sunak could serve as Liz Truss's Chancellor, which begs the question, well, what position could he take in her cabinet? And would he accept such a demotion, something that would not be a great office of state, foreign, home, chancellor or prime minister? So the idea that Rishi Sunak would take a more junior cabinet role, I think, is probably hard to imagine, which then leads to the very difficult situation for the incoming Liz Truss prime minister, that she will not only have her opponent Rishi Sunak on those backbenches carping, being an incredible sulk as Ted Heath became, but also Boris Johnson on those backbenches, no doubt wanting to be heard on many issues as well. It might be a tumultuous time for the incoming Prime Minister.
I think that is undoubtedly the case. Tom, as always, thank you very much indeed. Tom Howard there, our political correspondent in the studio. Well, straight after that debate last night in Stoke-on-Trent, I managed, because I was there, to catch up with some of the spin room MPs and cabinet ministers who were there to rev up their campaigns and tell us that either one of the candidates had done phenomenally well. Let's have a watch.
I think we had a really good debate. Liz finally got a bit of a word in, but nevertheless, it was, an opportunity to see clear differences between the candidates, because actually a lot they agree on the outcomes they want, to improve the prosperity of this country and for households and for families.
Look, I thought it was a great rambunctious debate, although at the end I think it showed the respect that both candidates had for each other. But on the central argument, how do we steer the country through this global fight against inflation, deal with the cost of living pressures, getting inflation down, and then get the investment into the economy that we need, and then take the tax cuts at the time when it's responsible and credible. I thought that Rishi Sunak won that hands down.
I thought Liz Truss did a fantastic job yet again in the debates, putting forward that positive vision for a low tax, high growth economy that's going to mean that our fantastic ceramic sector, but also those other type of digital technologies companies that we have here in Stoke-on-Trent are going to thrive, as well as making sure that those people who work really hard keep more of their hard-earned money in their pocket at a time when we're seeing obviously energy rises and fuel prices increasing.
Well, let's now bring in the political editor of the Huffington Post, Kevin Schofield, who joins us on the line. Kevin, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just first of all, quickly on last night, are you of the opinion that in the end, even though it might have been a score draw, the actual debate, that Liz probably edged it because Rishi Sunak's behind and needs a win?
Yeah, he really needed to knock it out of the park last night, and you could tell from the very beginning that he was very anxious to get on the front foot. Probably a little bit too anxious. I think that was why, part of the reason anyway, that he was interrupting Liz Truss as much as he was. It didn't come across very well on TV, I have to say. It seemed a bit rude, a bit overeager. And yeah, he didn't. He came up short, really. I think a score draw is probably the fairest way of putting it, which suits Liz Truss fine. I mean, if she's 24 points, or even anything like 24 points in front, then as long as she didn't make a complete mess of it last night, then she was in a pretty good place. I think, yeah, she'd definitely been the happier of the two candidates once the evening was over.
What can Rishi then do now to change things? We're going to have loads more debates and hustings, and there's ample opportunity, but the debates aren't going to change very much in terms of the actual content, because clearly the economy is the big issue. What can he do now to try and win people over, to try and change those numbers, if you like?
I think he can cross his fingers and hope for the best, that something, some unforeseen chaos or controversy is going to befall Liz Truss. I mean, I think that's the only thing really that can stop her winning now. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of when Theresa May went up against Andrea Leadsom, albeit very briefly, when would that be, 2017? And we didn't even get a contest then because Andrea Leadsom gave a disastrous interview to the Times and had to resign. So short of that type of, as I say, catastrophe befalling the Liz Truss campaign, then I really don't know what Rishi Sunak can do to change things. He obviously can't now change his position tax, given that he's been so critical of what Liz Truss is planning to do in terms of cutting taxes immediately if she becomes Prime Minister. So he can't really try to ape her that way because it would just look ridiculous. He set his stall out, I think, on a lot of things, actually. If you get away from all the heat around the economy and tax, I think they actually are quite well aligned on lots of things as well, including Brexit, really. So yeah, his room for manoeuvre is pretty limited. So yeah, I think it's going to be really, really tough for him now to try and change the weather and claw back that huge poll lead that Liz Truss currently enjoys.
And is the one person who's really enjoying these debates more than almost anyone else Keir Starmer, in the sense that the Labour Party is just building up rounds and rounds of ammunition that they can attack the government with over the next kind of year or so, given the intensity and the ferocity of these debates, given the fact that, frankly, they're kind of chopping lumps of each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, Labour are just, as you say, they're sitting back and just laughing their heads off. They've really upped their social media game as well, because there's not really much that they need to do other than repeat what Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak are saying to each other. They're both trying to distance themselves from the government's own record, the Conservative government's own record over the last few years, which is exactly what Labour would want to do. So they can turn around and say, look, this is what Rishi Sunak is saying about how bad the government is. This is what Liz Truss is saying about how bad the government is. Don't believe us, believe them. So yeah, it's this is always the way, though, when you have a party leadership contest. Inevitably, when you get two rival candidates, they have to criticise one another and obviously criticise what has gone before, which is food from heaven, really, for the Labour Party. That's not to say, though, that Keir Starmer has certainly sealed the deal with the public. I think it'll be interesting once the dust settles and once we have a new Prime Minister in September. The first polls into autumn, maybe after the party conference season, will be really interesting. I think if Labour are still far in front then I think we will get a lot of very nervous Conservative MPs. But I think we should maybe just hold off on calling this, on calling the next election for Labour just yet, I think, until we see what those polls look like.
And just very finally, Kevin, I think you used to work for The Sun, didn't you? And we are, a couple of hours away from their debate tonight. Is there anything that you are going to look out for, kind of interested? Will Rishi Sunak maybe change his tempo this time around, given the criticism? What are you going to look out for this evening?
Yeah, it's exactly what I was going to say. I think it'll be interesting to see whether Rishi Sunak maybe just draws his horns in a little bit tonight, maybe is a little bit more respectful of Liz Truss. I think probably wiser people in his campaign will have had a word in his ear and said, look, that did not work last night, this going on the offensive. You can get your points across without talking over Liz Truss all the time. It's just not a good look for a male politician to be interrupting and talking over a female politician. So no, I think it'll be interesting to see how he changes it. But as I say, there's not much he can do in terms of policy. I think Liz Truss will just stick to what she did last night, get her points across, appear reasonable, and yeah, unless, as I say, she has a major disaster tonight, or Rishi Sunak somehow manages to up his performance dramatically, then I think Liz Truss will end the night as she started this morning, is still quite far in front.
OK, Kevin, as always, thank you very much indeed. Kevin Scofield there from the Huffington Post. Lots of getting in touch, by the way. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Richard says, Sunak does not deserve the keys to number 10. He's a duplicitous, scheming individual, along with Gove. God forbid they need to be banished. Christina says it was obvious that Rishi Sunak was trying to silence Liz, thus stopping her from getting her message across. And Carol says, Rishi Sunak, in last night's TV debate, I have to say he came across as an arrogant bully. He constantly talked over Liz with her opinions not seeming to matter. He needs to show a bit more respect. Get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Going to pause there, though, on the briefing this afternoon. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, more on the Conservative leadership race, looking back at the life of David Trimble and why you should worry about fish and chips. All that, just a couple of minutes.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
Well, last night I got a chance in Stoke-on-Trent to speak to some members of the audience about how they felt the debate had gone and who, in the end, they were going to back in this Conservative leadership race. Let's have a look.
So I went in kind of supporting Rishi because obviously I think he was a lot more prominent within the Boris Johnson era. But I think Liz did a lot better than I expected it to be.
It was lively. It was more entertaining than I thought it would be. And it was very informative, and I thought they got the point over.
Obviously, they both seem to have quite a lot of long-term plans in place, which was quite interesting to hear. I didn't really hear much about short-term, which is what I was interested in, to be honest. But no, as an overall, it was quite interesting.
Let's bring in the Conservative MP Andrew Bowie, who is backing Rishi Sunak to become Prime Minister, and is very delightfully in his car in some part of the country. Hello, Andrew. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, Darren. Summer recess. You're never in one place for very long.
I love it. And the joys of modern technology. Let's just, first of all, take on this kind of mansplaining point that Therese Coffey put to me last night. We've heard lots of Liz Truss supporters say it today. Do you think he got the tempo at least wrong, the kind of constant interrupting? I saw Chris Hope put it at 22 times in the first 12 minutes.
Yeah, so I disagree, Darren. I think what we saw last night was a robust debate between two people who are very capable and able of holding their own. These are two experienced politicians, both long-time cabinet members who are used to strong argument and robust debate. And, Liz Truss doesn't need any help in that regard. She's a very good debater in her own right. She's able to take the arguments to Rishi, as she did, and Rishi took the arguments to her. And I think what we saw last night was a battle of ideas played out on the national stage. I think it was good for the Conservative Party, actually, because it showed that we are the only party with these ideas, given that we've been in power now for 12 years. In fact, we're still able to have these robust discussions about the future is a very good thing indeed, very healthy for the party. So I don't think it was a negative at all.
Well, let's take that on then a little bit. Do you think that Liz Truss's economic plans are irresponsible and fairy tale economics?
Look, I think you've got to take very seriously the issues around her economic plan. I mean, when you hear her favourite economist, Patrick Minford, suggesting that interest rates would have to rise by 7% and that would be no bad thing, I think you've got to question whether or not that's the right economic policy for the country. I mean, take, for example, what that would mean for mortgages, for people with credit cards, people with loans, overdrafts, and all the rest. It would have a huge economic impact on the everyday lives of everybody here in the country. So we've got to ask, tough questions over her economic plan. That's not to say that we can't find common ground. At the end of the day, we're going to have to come together and work together, whoever wins this leadership race. But, if you're asking me who I think has got the more sensible, pragmatic plan to get this economy moving in the right way, the one that isn't going to cause disruption for British people by, increasing interest rates by such a large percentage, I would say it was Rishi Sunak. He's the one with the plan to get inflation down, to grow the economy, and then to cut tax.
That's a perfectly legitimate place to be, and Rishi Sunak portrayed himself last night as a very principled politician. He clearly thinks what Liz Truss's proposal is wrong. If she wins, how can you and he, and indeed the rest of the supporters, legitimately, genuinely tell the public, because it's probably what you'll have to do, that Liz Truss' plan is a good idea? Surely that is not possible. You cannot do a reverse ferret on this. If you think Liz Truss' plan is bad for the economy, how, if she becomes Prime Minister, could you ever support it? You couldn't, could you?
Well, look, there's a reason I'm supporting Rishi to be Prime Minister. That's because I think his plans are better. But of course we could support Liz Truss as Prime Minister. We go through these leadership elections and we have these robust debates. We had it in 2019 with Jeremy Hunt versus Boris Johnson. We had it in 2016. We had it in 2005 when David Cameron came in and was up against David Davis. And, at the end of the day, the Conservative Party is a very broad church. We come together in the interest of the party and indeed in the national interest, and we fight as one. And that's exactly what's going to happen.
I'm going to be like Rishi Sunak a little bit here, but that's the point. That's what people hate about politics, isn't it? How Rishi Sunak clearly does not think it is in the national interest to cut taxes at this stage. I assume that you don't think it, given the fact that you're supporting him. How can you say, yes, it might be good for the party unity, but how can you genuinely sit here and say that in a couple of months' time, if Liz Truss wins, that it is in the national interests to cut taxes, when it is very clear right now you do not think that is the case?
It's very much in the national interest for the party to come together after this. We're going to still be in government at least for the next 2 years and hopefully well beyond that if we win a fifth historic general election in 2 years' time. And so it would not be in the interest of anybody to continue on this fight and this debate about the direction of the party post the result of this election. Look, back in 1979 when Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister, before that actually when she won the leadership, she was arguing for a very different economic model than any of her competitors. At the end of the day, she won the leadership election, the party accepted her economic plan, and even those who'd fought against her got behind it and moved forward. We want to make a success of whoever wins this election's proposals, their plans. That's definitely in the national interest. That's what we will be doing. But of course, I think we'll be doing that with Rishi Sunak in Downing Street and not in number 11, next door in number 10. That's what we're going to be continuing to work towards over the next few weeks.
Given you look at the polling numbers, the opinion polls, I think even Rishi Sunak accepts he's the underdog at the moment in this campaign. What can he do? I mean, the whole point is we've heard the debate, those big debates, particularly around the economy now 3 times, does not seem to be shifting opinion among Conservative members. What can he do in the days ahead, the hours ahead maybe, to try and change that?
Well, look, there's still quite a few weeks to go in this leadership election. No ballot paper has been sent out to Conservative Party members just yet. We're still in the very early stages of this. It was less than a week ago that members of Parliament finished their process, and let's not forget that Rishi Sunak ended up winning that by quite a comfortable margin, that process with members of Parliament. Rishi's just beginning to tour the country now, speak to members individually, meet them, and I think when they get to see more of him and they get to meet him in person, and he will be speaking to more Conservative Party members than I think just about any other candidate, any other leadership election in history within the party, then they'll remember why they fell in love with him during the pandemic, and they'll see why he is the best person to lead this country, the best person to be put into number 10 Downing Street, with his history of, quick-fire decision-making in the Treasury, with his decisions over furlough that saved 11 million jobs, with his plans to support us during the cost of living situation we find ourselves in right now. I think the more people see of Rishi, the more they'll realise that he is the man for the job, and however much we disagree right now, it would be good to get behind him, unite in the national interest and move this country forward.
OK, well, we will see, and we'll have you on again in the future. Andrew, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Joining us down the line from Aberdeen. OK, we're going to pause there on GB News. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we'll be looking back at the life of Lord David Trimble and his contribution to the Good Friday Agreement. And we're going to be talking about fish and chips. You want to stay tuned for that and so much more between now and 4. But first, at just after 3:30, let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines.
Thanks, Darren. Good afternoon. It's 3:33. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. The two candidates to become the UK's next Prime Minister will face off again tonight, following a heated first head-to-head debate. The pair traded blows over tax, with the Foreign Secretary saying Rishi Sunak would lead the country into recession. But the former Chancellor claimed there was nothing Conservative about Mrs Truss's approach.
Under my plans, we would start paying down the debt in 3 years' time. So I'm not putting it on the never. I would start paying it down in 3 years.
Liz, that's simply not right. You promised almost £40 billion of unfunded tax cuts, £40 billion more borrowing. That is the country's credit card. It's our children and grandchildren, everyone here's kids. We're going to have to pick up the tab for that.
Public concern over inflation has reached its highest level in 40 years. A poll by Ipsos found that 45% of adults think it's one of the most important issues facing the country today as prices continue to rise. The data shows people aged 18 to 34 were most concerned. MPs are criticising the government over its handling of the coronavirus traffic light travel system, which set the rules for those arriving in the UK. The Public Accounts Committee says nearly £500 million was spent on the quarantine scheme. That caused huge confusion, with 10 rule changes within a year. Arrivals from red list countries had to stay in a quarantine hotel for at least 10 days, but only 2% of those tested positive. And Network Rail is advising people not to travel by rail tomorrow unless absolutely necessary, due to another day of strikes. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators will walk out, leaving just 20% of services running. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. We'll get back to Darren and the briefing shortly.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.200 to the dollar and 1.185 to the euro. The price of gold currently stands at £1,431.02 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
on digital, absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Very welcome back to GB News. 22 minutes to 4 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. We're on TV, online, and indeed on your wireless radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Do get in touch, by the way, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or tweet us at GBNews. Lots of you not very happy with Rishi Sunak. I'm sure there are some people out there who do quite like the former Chancellor and want to see him become the Conservative leader or indeed Prime Minister. Do get in touch either way, and we'll get to a couple of those a little later on in the programme. But first, former US President Bill Clinton has paid tribute to the former Northern Ireland First Minister, Lord David Trimble, calling him a leader of courage and vision. Former Prime Ministers Tony Blair said that without David Trimble, the Good Friday Agreement would not have been possible. Lord Trimble died yesterday, aged 77. He, of course, was instrumental in the negotiation and the implementation of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. Well, let's go live to Stormont now, get the very latest on this from our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie. Dougie, good afternoon to you. I'm sure you knew David Trimble. He was a huge political figure over the last 3 or 4 decades in Northern Ireland. Just give us a sense of the man and the contribution he made, not just to that building behind you, but indeed to the entire province.
Yes, I knew David Trimble extremely well. In fact, I would dare say that I was the closest member of the media to what was going on inside Glengall Street in 1995 and 1998 for various reasons. But he was a law lecturer. He came from the Vanguard Party, a very unionist background, and he transferred across there with such people as William Wright of Wrightbus. His grounding in the unionist family was very, very deep, and in 1995 he surprisingly took the leadership of the Ulster Unionist Party against none other than Lord Kilclooney or John Taylor. His vote split 3 ways and David Trimble came through the middle. He surrounded himself with people who were looking forward and going forward at the time, such people as Dermot Nesbitt and Reg Empey. Now, constitutionally, he was perfect. His legality and the understanding of the constitutional issues were perfect, but he had inherited a party that was the 3rd biggest party in Westminster. It had such names as Enoch Powell in its ranks. That's the sort of quality that we were talking at that stage. But he decided that he had everything to give, but he had also everything to lose. And he teamed up with John Hume of the SDLP, again a very liberal, go-forward thinking type person. And between the two of them, they met up with Tony Blair, Albert Reynolds, and it must be said Garrett Fitzgerald before that as well. Gerry Adams was even in that mix. And those men realised that Northern Ireland could not stay in this circle of violence that it was in, costing lives, and decided to move forward. And the Good Friday Agreement was born, and it gave us 25 years of peace in Northern Ireland. Relative peace. It wasn't perfect, and it must be said he was the first minister. At that point, it was a ropey run for him, because those first 4 years, we said that constitutionally he was perfect. It was security that pulled him down. The letting go of the prisoners. Tony Blair writing on walls, promises to him, and of course those letters of comfort and Queen's pardons of mercy that were handed out to the IRA were basically fodder, or were fuel to those that wanted to try and get him in the long grass, I suppose. And in 2005, while he didn't control the right wing of his own party, they crossed the floor to the DUP in Paisley's party. And of course, in 2005, he lost his own seat as an MP. And that was the start of the end for the Ulster Unionist Party. Today, we were meant to be looking at a recall of an assembly to elect a speaker after the elections in May, because no unionist will back what's going on here because of the protocol. And it is very telling that David Trimble himself said that the protocol and the Good Friday Agreement could not exist in the same space. And it is a loss for Northern Ireland and a loss for Northern Ireland's politics that he's no longer here.
Indeed. Dougie Beattie there, live in Belfast for this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in the Northern Ireland-based journalist Amanda Ferguson, who's also in Belfast for this afternoon. Amanda, good afternoon to you. Of course, David Trimble was a unionist leader, but also lots of voices north and south of the border today from across communities paying tribute to Lord Trimble.
Yes, that's right. The column inches and the airwaves have been largely dedicated to reflecting on the legacy of Lord Trimble, who's died at the age of 77 following a short illness. I think that his contribution to the peace process and the peace that we enjoy today, can't be talked about enough. I think that because of the work that people like Lord Trimble and the late SDLP leader John Hume put into pulling the peace process together and the risks that they took in doing so, both of their parties have suffered electorally since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. So they definitely were men who put the people of Northern Ireland of country before their own political parties. And I think that he will be remembered kindly in the history books, not by any means an uncontroversial figure in some circumstances, but certainly someone with vision and courage, as was reflected across the three main local newspapers in Northern Ireland today. The Irish News, the Belfast Telegraph and the Newsletter all carried the same headline about his vision and courage.
I think when he was first elected, he was viewed as a bit of a unionist hardliner, wasn't he? But he dragged unionism along with him, certainly into the early noughties. But in recent times, he was a very vocal critic of the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Yes, I think that Lord Trimble was an intelligent man. He was a trained lawyer, a lecturer. He was aware of what unionism needed. It may not always have made him the most popular person within his own community, and he certainly received a lot of criticism within unionism and a lot of challenges to his leadership and to his ultimate downfall. But he knew what needed to be done. I think what we have seen over the last day or so is people reflecting on the huge contribution that he's made to the democracy that we enjoy today. The parties of government are in those structures that were created 25 years ago because of the work of people like David Trimble, and he's received glowing condolences, glowing tributes being paid to him for the part that he played in that, from moving from a position of hardline unionism to that consensus politics that was required to move society forward.
Fascinating stuff. Amanda, really appreciate your time this afternoon. Amanda Ferguson there, joined us live from Belfast on the death of Lord David Trimble, who died yesterday, aged 77 years old. Now, the European Union have agreed to ration natural gas this winter to protect themselves against any further supply cuts by Russia as Moscow pursues its invasion of Ukraine. EU energy ministers approved a draft European law which is meant to lower demand for gas by 15% from August through to March. The Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, welcomed the move, saying in a statement that the EU has taken a decisive step to face down the threat of a full gas disruption by Putin. It comes, though, at a time in which Russia is slowly turning off the taps in Europe. Let's go to Brussels and join journalist Jack Parrick. Jack, good afternoon to you. Just explain to us what's been agreed today by these EU energy ministers.
Well, Darren, they've got pretty much a very heavily watered down agreement on what was proposed just a week ago by the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. What the Commission wanted to do was to get all countries to commit to a mandatory 15% reduction of their natural gas consumption in order to try and fill up the storage facilities to prevent what they call as Moscow's blackmail, as in Moscow being able to turn off the taps at any time that they want. If the storage facilities are full, then the EU has enough power itself. Now, what the energy ministers have agreed to do today is voluntary. They will try, through whatever means they see nationally, to reduce the gas consumption by 15%. And there are a raft of exemptions and derogations. For instance, for island nations like Ireland, Malta and Cyprus, who are not linked in or interconnected with other gas systems around the European Union. They're islands, so they have their own gas capacity. They pretty much don't have to be involved in this plan. Also, countries that fill up their gas storage facilities, that they overshoot targets, they won't have to be involved anymore. And frankly, this is all because the reality is that this plan was to protect the big countries in the European Union. 50% of gas consumption in the EU is by the three biggest economies, France, Italy, and specifically Germany, which has seen the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which brings Russian gas into Germany. The Russians are reducing that down to 20% of capacity. So that's a big issue for Europe, for the EU's biggest economy.
Talking about gas rationing here, we're literally talking about people having to turn down their heating, factories having to limit what they can do. I mean, this is going to have proper real-world consequences.
Yeah, and this is the real complication, Darren. And, you've done your time reporting on Brussels. You know how difficult this stuff can be for the EU. And that's really where this fudge has come about. A lot of countries, for instance, have much more, gas consumption in industry. So for them, they have to focus on trying to get businesses to reduce gas consumption. Other countries, their gas consumption is much more domestic. So essentially what they would have to do is to tell their citizens to limit their household consumption, so turn off your heating or limit it to a certain temperature. And you know full well that that is not something that national governments in the European Union are going to want to do. Spain and Portugal came out vociferously against this. They don't want to tell their citizens to reduce their heating, to turn their heating down, because Germany needs to save their gas. And that's really where we've seen the divisions. Also, there's a massive division with Hungary. This didn't need unanimous approval, which is why it got through. Hungary, we know, voted against it. The Hungarian foreign minister just last week was in Moscow asking Russia for more natural gas. So while the European Union is coming out and saying, listen, this is all solidarity, we're all on the same page, we're going to reduce our gas, we're going to get gas from other places like liquefied natural gas from North Africa, etc. They're saying it's full of solidarity, but really this is a bit of a ropey net that they've cast with this energy ministers meeting, which was an emergency one that they called specifically on this proposal that the European Commission put forward last week.
OK, Jack, as always, really appreciate your time and your analysis this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed, Jack Parrock there. Joining us live from Brussels. Now, here's a devastating story to add to what was already a pretty gloomy one. Half of Britain's 10,500 fish and chip shops could close due to rocketing costs. As many as 5,000 face being battered by crippling tariffs and the soaring prices of ingredients. Government figures, there we go, I'm back, have revealed the combination means that the price of a fish and chip supper could rise from an average of £8.50 to £11.50. The latest blow came last week when ministers pressed ahead with a 35% tariff on all seafood imported from Russia in a bid to try and hammer President Vladimir Putin over his invasion of Ukraine. So lots of factors at play here, and I've certainly noticed the cost of a fish supper going up. Let's bring in Andrew Crook. He is from the National Federation of Fish Fryers and joins us down the line. Andrew, good afternoon to you. Not good news at all, but it seems to be a whole combination of different factors coming into play.
Yeah, there's so many factors that are affecting our industry, and we're doing our best to cushion consumers. Nobody wants to put prices up. We are trying to keep those price increases to a minimum. But unfortunately, we are seeing inflationary prices on more or less everything that comes into our shops. And then, obviously, the tariff is likely to affect that. We have to say, though, we do support the government in any action that they need to take to bring the conflict to a speedier conclusion. But they have to admit, and they have admitted, that it's going to affect fish and chips directly. So my job is to protect my members and ask the government to look at support, not just for the fish and chip sector, but for the whole of hospitality. I think we need a long-term plan, a strategy to take us forward and make sure we're there on the other side of this to help rebuild the economy.
Very true. And I, I'm sure lots of our viewers, enjoy fish and chips, particularly on a Friday. Is there a sign that people are buying less? Has this had an impact on sales? I mean, there's a cost of living crisis on, everything's going up, and people are having to cut back, aren't they?
Yeah, well, we are aware of that, and that's why we're trying to cushion consumers. But we have so many options, and shops are looking at alternative species. Shops are looking at different options. So we've got sausages, we've got pies, there are other options there. But so far, I think consumers are sticking with fish and chips. It's still a great value meal when you compare it to other meals. So I think we've still got a special place for the nation's heart, and I think the dish of fish and chips will survive. But what we need to do is make sure that the shops that are paying their staff well, providing the good jobs, are the ones that make it through. Because at the moment, with the current way VAT is levied on hospitality, it's the good operators, the ones that invest in the business, the ones that use environmentally sound packaging, that are under the most threat. So we're asking government to just have a look at the way things are, tax is levied on us, and try and work with us, and let's come up with this strategy to take things forward.
Our title under, you can't see this, but it says, COD help us. Because traditionally, of course, it has been cod has been fish and chips, hasn't it? But you were alluding to the fact that there are lots of options. Fish and chips doesn't have to be cod.
Yeah, there's all sorts of different species, and I think the government are keen for us to use some of the domestic catch, which is great. But we are geared up as an industry to do a lot of the same things. So a lot of cod, a lot of haddock. If you've got 5 different species in your pan, it's very difficult to know which is which. So again, it makes it very difficult. But we are open to all sorts of options. And we've been talking to people about fish farming as well. So for the future, there are going to be some more options there. It's just this period now is going to be very tough. But we just want to be there to provide jobs. As hospitality sector, we employ 2.5 million people direct, 9 million people when you look at the supply chain, manufacturing equipment and supplying the products. And we need special consideration, and we need a strategy to take us forward. And that's what we've been asking for months. DEFRA have been great listening to us, as have BAYS and HMRC, but so far nobody's acted on it. And the longer this goes on, the more pain my members are under, and the rest of hospitality are under. So we ask for urgent action, and we just need this support. We need this plan.
Really good stuff. Fascinating. I hope we get through it all right, because we all love fish and chips. Andrew, thank you very much. And I believe you're persevered through some COVID. You seem pretty chipper to me, though, but thanks for joining us. It's Andrew Cook there, who's from the National Federation of Fish Fryers. Let's move on back to the leadership race for the Conservative Party. Lots of you getting in touch. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Mark says, good afternoon, Darren. When Sunak loses, you won't see him for dust. He'll be off for a job in the city or a PLC. Julia says, I've just listened to Andrew Bowie from Aberdeen on GB News, and doesn't necessarily agree with his view that Rishi has a plan to reduce inflation. Alan says, as a neutral, I cannot understand how polling suggests Conservative members are abandoning basic Conservative values of sound finance and reducing government borrowing. Even the IMF is for Rishi Sunak's fiscal policies and his priority to reduce inflation. And one more, Barry says, what a load of nonsense. We in the UK are sat on billions of tonnes of natural gas, coal and oil, and will be threatened by our own government to ration this winter. We should go ahead and stop with this green nonsense and kowtowing to everyone else. GB Views, GB News. UK. That's it for me today. Back again at 3 tomorrow. Mark Longhurst is up next in for Colin Brazier from 4 o'clock. I'll leave you with the weather from the Met Office. Have a nice afternoon.
Hi there. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. After a relatively cloudy day in many places, there'll be an increased chance of clear spells developing overnight, and under those clear skies it will feel cool. Still 1 or 2 showers around as we end the day and go into Wednesday, but on the whole, high pressure is building in from the west, and that means winds are lighter and skies are getting clearer compared with earlier in the week. So